So thank you very much. Scott asked us to talk today about how to build a successful jazz career. And success, of course, has two aspects, sort of artistic success and financial success. And they although they're different in a lot of ways, they also help each other in a lot of ways too. And I guess before we get into the details of your own career, could you talk a little bit about how you think about success in those two ways?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's my first time in New Orleans, and I'm really excited to be here. Well, I was thinking about this question, and I just remember hearing Art Blakey say, the measure of success is longevity. So being able to stay in the game, so to speak, to stay on your path as a musician, with all of the ups and downs that come with it, mostly ups, but the corners and unexpected kinds of things that happen in anyone's career. So I think the idea of longevity for me.
So in your experience, you've seen a lot of other people's careers. What separates the ones that are sort of short-lived careers versus sort of lengthy careers?
Well, I'm thinking of mentors, and I want to kind of focus on these people who are particular in my life, who've made a difference, and also the way that they have seen what continuity means for me. The idea of making a decision that you're going to kind of stay that path. And I bring up Betty Carter as a mentor as well, because she was a person who represented that kind of tenacity, a sense of staying really well-oiled and very much on top of her game throughout her career and being inspirational. My daughter Layla and I have been listening to Betty for the last few days, and it just has given me so much energy hearing her again. And I'm just remembering the expectation on stage. So I think we find this thing that we love, and then we find ways to continue to hold on to it and to want to continue to nurture it, and finding this understanding a sense of appreciation for being able to do something that you really love.
Can you talk a little more specifically about Betty in particular, because she, had a reputation for starting her own record company and taking care of business in that sense, but also being very much a band leader, a very sort of having a real clear idea of what she wanted on the bandstand and really pushing people to give it to her. And what lessons you were able to take in both the sort of business side and the artistic side from her and apply to your own career?
Right, well, you're really, all those things you said are correct. That she was a person who really knew her worth. She knew who she was in relation to the scene, and she was one of those personalities that you really miss. So when a person like Betty, we lose a person like that, or we lose a person like Ornette, or these personalities that really make up the energy of what is our music. And of course, she was a person who hired a lot of young musicians. I mean, when I first came to New York in the 80s, there were certain band leaders that made it their business to really encourage the next generations of musicians. And so people came to New York with this hope that maybe I can audition for Art Blakey's band, and maybe I'll get that chair. And then things would change for you if you got a gig like that. All of a sudden, people knew who you were, and you were making a living playing music. And she was one of those people. So the young musicians were excited to have that opportunity. And I was going to say one more thing.
Sure.
She also paid young people to rehearse. So it gave you a sense of the value of your time and also the expectation she had when you got on the bandstand. Now, if she's going to pay you for a rehearsal, then you should be ready when it's time to hit the bandstand.
And why is rehearsal, I mean, I interview a lot of jazz people and say, oh, we don't have to rehearse because we're all great musicians and we can just show up on the gig and do a great show. And sometimes that's true, but in your mind, why is rehearsal was crucial in general and to Betty's music in particular?
Well, again, she's training young musicians. So rehearsal was like going to school, you know. It was giving you an opportunity to, you know, understand the level of expectation, which was high, and to prepare you to practice, you know. So if you're learning a new tune of hers, or any band leader for that matter, who's, you know, expecting you to you know, to do your best on when a performance is coming, that rehearsal prepares you for your own internal practice, and it's also a bit of a barometer for what it will be like when you actually play the tune on stage, because it's completely different being in a rehearsal and then having to play the tune on stage. You know, the whole dynamic changes once the people become a part of that experience.
What's the difference between playing in a rehearsed band versus an unrehearsed band?
Well, each setting is different, of course. But during that time, I was talking about in the 80s, where Betty had this band and Art Blakey had these bands that were working all the time. I mean, you know, guys used to say that Blakey was really never off. He was always on tour. So that's a special situation where you have a band that's rehearsing that much, and they're playing every night, as opposed to, say, a new group of people that are getting together to learn. Maybe she's breaking in a new piano player. So it changes the expectation, but I have a great deal of respect for the idea of rehearsal and practice. And I remember when I first started working with Charles Lloyd, you know, he is a really great band leader as well. And watching the way that all of these different people ran their bands, it was a great education for me. And with Charles in particular, we play a long sound check. I mean, it's almost as long as the gig. So, you know, working through tunes, we're working through the sound issues that might, you know, idiosyncrasies of each venue that we're playing. But it polishes the band. So if you're, you know, it's like a band that's together for many, many years. You know, they have that kind of organic chemistry, and they understand each other. Rehearsing the way that Charles would, it helped to kind of, you know, create a handicap for that. You know, you're trying to find a way to get to that experience of the great bands that really breathe together.
So a few minutes ago, you talked that Betty was a person who knew her worth and was tenacious about making sure she got it. And can you give us some examples how that related to the business side of things?
In terms of her?
Yeah, and what you took away from it to apply to your own career.
Well, as you mentioned, she had her own record company, Bed Carr, and I actually met my manager, Ora Harris, at that time. I don't see her here now, but Ora worked with Betty for many years, and you know, during that time when that record was nominated for a Grammy, won a Grammy Award. So she had her own record company that was really doing well, and she was in control of her art form. She was in control of her work, and you have to have a lot of respect for that as well.
Okay. And how were you able to apply that to your career?
Well, you know, I don't have my own record company, but I've been fortunate through the years to be able to do what I wanted to do. And I feel, each of the projects that I put out in my career, I was the one who really was the engine driving those projects.
So New Orleans, of course, has a very strong musical personality as a city, but the Detroit that you grew up in also had a very strong musical personality. And can you talk about how that influenced both your music and your sort of approach to music as a career?
Okay. Yes. So I was just talking to Russell Malone, who's going to be playing with us later. And he's just doing some gigs with Aretha, which is really exciting, you know. But that's kind of a view into what Detroit is about. I mean, you have like this great tradition of gospel music, also, you know, very staunch bebop tradition. I understand there's a really strong hip hop thing going on there, and electronica, all these different kinds of things. The classical music tradition as well, European classical tradition. And all these people would come together to make these records, Motown records. So there's always been a kind of openness about genre, you know, and people moved really fluidly between them. And there was not a camp kind of thing where, you know, these musicians stick to this, or it was always, what I grew up understanding was most of those musicians that I was mentored by, like Marcus Belgrave or Donald Walden or Gene Key, they wrote for Stevie Wonder. You know, they were a part of those iconic Motown records we love. So they were doing those records, and you know, they're great jazz musicians. And so that was a kind of openness that I grew up under, that, you know, good music is good music. We did everything. We played bar mitzvahs, we played in all kinds of different settings. So once I came to New York, I felt like, you know, very comfortable with the idea of moving back and forth between different groups of musicians who some didn't feel the same way I did, but I felt very comfortable about that.
But you had a little taste of that yourself when you were out with Mary Wilson of the Supremes for a while, right? And
that's right.
You know, when people think of your career, they don't think of that. But you know, why was that, you know, helpful to your own musical growth and important to your own sort of, you know, being able to support yourself with music, and also that sort of that openness to genre that you were just talking about?
In terms of Mary Wilson?
Yeah.
Well, when I first came to New York, I got a phone call from a bass player named Duke Billingsley, who was working with Mary Wilson. And he said, we need a piano player. And I was like, wow, that would be really great, you know, to have a chance to play these songs that I grew up listening to, and to hopefully I can get some, you know, some of that fashion and makeup and all the glamour that's associated with them. So I was excited about being in that group. And I think I wasn't really getting calls to do jazz. At that time, I just got to New York, so I came in with a big blast because Oliver Lake needed a piano player when I first came in. I met him through Dwight Andrews, who's yes, he's a Detroiter and also a great friend, mentor. And he wrote all the music for August Wilson's plays. I don't know if you knew that, but he's just a kind of a Renaissance person. But they looked out for me. I mean, I have to say, a lot of this is about mentorship and people looking out for each other. And through him, Oliver trusted him to say, okay, this piano player could do your record. So I had that coming in as a session, the first thing I came in, and that was amazing to come into New York with a record, you know, to do a record with a great artist like Oliver Lake. But then it got real quiet after that. And months went by, and I'm like, oh my goodness, and what am I gonna do? And when I got that call to do Mary, it was like a rescue in a way. So it was a great experience playing that music and, you know, being with her.
So a lot of what you're talking about is in making your way into the business is that there's this network of Detroit people in a sense of, Dwight or Marcus Belgrave or, and people in your own generation. And, why is that sort of, those community connections important, as, in creating a career?
Well, you're right. I mean, you build on trust. And it takes people a while different careers happen differently, right? You have some people that come in and everything explodes for them right away. Record deals and press and, and then you have other people that kind of happens more slowly. And that's the thing that you have to kind of understand, that it works differently for all of us. But I think, again, longevity is the way that you're telling at the end of the road, it kind of all kind of balances out. If you're still in the game, right? If you're still there doing what you love. But I would say also, I'm a Howard University grad. I went to Howard University, and while I was there, I met John Malachi, who was the pianist with the Billy Eckstine Band when Sarah Vaughan and Charlie Parker and Dizzy, and they were in the band. And John Malachi was really good friends with Dr. Billy Taylor, and there are these connections. So I met Dr. Taylor through John Malachi, and all of these different relationships, they create this kind of platform for you as a young musician. And hopefully when you have the opportunity and it presents itself, if you do a good job, you'll start to build a reputation for being dependable, and it's a slow process, but it happens.
So the panel before us was Christian Scott and Jameson Ross, and they were talking about their experiences going to music school at Berkeley and Florida State, and which is a very common thing nowadays. Lots of people come through, Berkeley or New England Conservatory or, Juilliard or whatever, Manhattan Music. But when you went to Howard, and with the jazz education was still a very new idea, an untested idea, and that, after decades of people sort of learning, by trial and error on the bandstand, there was this sort of organized approach to jazz education that was, more closer to the traditional music education that these schools had offered. And as one of the pioneers, as one of the first students to go through that kind of a process, what was it like for you as an experience? And there was this time of transition in the way jazz musicians started their career, in a sense.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. I mean, I am the first jazz studies graduate from Howard.
Really?
Interestingly enough, yeah. And, I think having come up in Detroit, I really learned from the musicians. Marcus, I was thinking about this, the patience that he had, as all of us, Bob Hurst is another one, Kenny Garrett and Regina Carter and James Carter. A lot of us really benefited from the generosity of those musicians from Detroit.
Explain the Marcus's program in Detroit a little bit.
So Marcus Belgrave, great trumpet player. We just lost him last year. I'm really sad to say. But he's from Chester, Pennsylvania. His influence was Clifford Brown, and he played with Ray Charles. Any of you know Marcus Belgrave? Yes. Yeah, it's the first time I came to this area. I came to Baton Rouge with Marcus as a kid. But he, as I mentioned, played with Ray Charles all those years. So if you guys saw the Jamie Foxx movie, he was one of those guys in the band that was being portrayed, the trumpet player. And so he also played with Max Roach, and he also played with Charles Mingus. But he didn't want to be in New York. He didn't really like the hard life of that. And decided, after coming to Detroit and seeing the kinds of, like I was talking about, across genre, people could make a good living there and do a lot of different really good music. And he decided to stay, which was our benefit. Because as a result of him staying, he built like a program for young people, along with the other musicians, that gave us a chance to learn in the same way that he learned, and that his teachers learned, and so forth and so on. So I came up learning that way. And I also went to the university, so I feel great to have had both.
So you had both versions of it. And what was the sort of advantages and disadvantages of each of those methods of learning the music?
Well, I don't know if I could put it in those terms, but I would say that learning in the way that I did from Marcus and the musicians in Detroit kind of really prepared me for pretty much anything I was going to experience. If I wasn't ready, I knew how to get ready. And, it's a community-based kind of experience where you have these musicians who are, like the Jazz Development Workshop is an organization Marcus created. And the idea was to put seasoned master jazz musicians in a big band with younger musicians. And so we sat next to these great musicians and learned what is a big sound, what is, you A/B yourself and you have a sense of where you need to go being in an environment like that.
And did you also learn some of the non-musical aspects of the business? Can you talk about that a little bit?
So a lot of stories, storytelling and a sense of, what the life was going to be. And whether you are, there's a place where you become a part of the group, and you're kind of build toward that respect from the elder musicians. So that's a great experience, to at some point where musicians will say, yeah, that was good or whatever.
But do they also talk to you about, dealing with club owners or agents or record companies too?
You get experiences from that, watching them deal with it. So yes, you watch the, the kinds of maybe the successes and the disappointments of being a freelance musician. Some of them being looked over, now and then, the great feeling of being appreciated and respected in your own hometown, which it's not always, a lot of those guys didn't necessarily get the respect, because they're, thought of as local. But those kinds of things are, by watching them.
Can you put into words any of the lessons about the business side of things that you took away from those early experiences in Detroit?
Well, interesting for me is the musicians in Detroit were also like Betty's from the Detroit area. She's from Flint, Michigan. Dee Dee Bridgewater's from Flint, Michigan. So, I mean, there is what I remember during my coming up, there was something called Metro Arts, and those musicians got together, created a collective. So there were collectives around the country like BAG, Black Artist Group in St. Louis. There was the AACM in Chicago. And so there were these different organizations that were coming together to support each other. I was in a group called M-Base in Brooklyn that was coming out of that idea of those groups. Those musicians, they made records. They recorded themselves. They kept the recordings, and that's a way of holding on to the legacy. So that was their way of dealing with the business.
And what was the advantage of being in a collective like that? I know you worked with Steve Coleman and those guys in Brooklyn, and you worked on each other's records, and was money pooled, or was there support for each other in other ways besides playing on each other's records?
I would say that, there was also a group called the Black Rock Coalition that was existing at the same time. And so people were having the same kinds of ideas about how to sustain in an industry that wasn't really looking at the work we were doing. Mm-hmm. So these collectives were opportunities for the musicians to still be productive, to still, support each other by playing each other's music, by challenging each other as musicians. So you had musicians who were, auditioning for Blakey's band, for instance, and some, like Robin Eubanks. Mm-hmm. So you had some that were becoming more kind of accepted in terms of the mainstream jazz community. You had a lot of the guys who were really spitfire readers, so they were going to do Broadway shows. So everybody was trying to kind of up their ante as professional musicians within that setting, which was, I thought, good.
Was the idea that if these people who are sort of, outsiders, like, the Art Ensemble Chicago and those guys who were playing a different kind of music than was commercially acceptable at that time, that if they banded together, they would have more of a voice and presence than they would as individuals? Was that sort of the idea?
Yeah, well, I can't really speak for the AACM, although they were definitely inspirational in terms of the way that they were supporting each other's work. And I know that Henry Threadgill just got the Pulitzer, which is really exciting. Muhal, a couple of years ago, got an honorary doctorate from Columbia. So the attention around George Lewis and the work that he's been doing with the book that he wrote, I think it's starting to create more of a sense of the importance of that group in a mainstream way.
But they might not have had, I guess what I'm saying is they might not have had that longevity that we've been talking about if they hadn't banded together as a collective rather than just,
yeah, there's power definitely in numbers. There's power in that support of the community.
And how do those collectives get started? Do you have any insight into that?
Well, I can just say that I know with Detroit, I mentioned the musicians there. There was an interest in getting this music out there. I mean, the music is, inspiring, and they were writing great music, and they understood their worth, as I mentioned with Betty before, and she created her label. So just because that door shuts over there doesn't mean no. You just continue to find your way, which making that collective kind of coming together creates that possibility.
So in the early 80s, at the same time that you're, within the same few years that you're working with Mary Wilson playing the Supremes music, you're also working with M-Bass and playing this very avant-garde music, and over the course of your career, you've played a lot of different kinds of jazz, both inside and outside. And why, does that harken back to Detroit, where there was this openness about genre? And why has it been valuable to you?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I always felt that I had a right to move in and out of whatever appealed to me creatively. And there's certain musicians I feel that, have the same kind of spirit. Like I'm really excited to be associated with Terry Lynn Carrington for all these years. I mean, we've been musically exchanging ideas for, a long time. And so I think that kind of relationship, there's certain people that in my career that really have been there in a way that makes it particularly special when you get together to play with them. All of those years of, playing together comes back when we're in the bandstand together.
And how did you first get connected with Terry Lynn?
I first met her at Howard University, I believe, when her father, saxophonist, I don't know if you guys know Terry Lynn Carrington's work, a great drummer. She's a really important musician, yes. And she was maybe, 12 years old when I met her. Her dad would take her around to the musicians community and she met Papa Joe Jones. He put his hand on her. She met, all the great drummers put their hand on her. She was such a gifted prodigy at such a young age. But I met her that early. But the thing about her, and I was relating this to being able to cross genre, she always was open to many different kinds of music. I mean, she's, with the Arsenio Hall show, she was involved in that. So she worked with all the pop musicians, all the R&B and rock musicians. And she worked with avant-garde musicians, all this whole different openness. So it's been fun playing with her through the years because she has the same kind of philosophy.
And recently, Terry Lynn has been doing these sort of all-female projects, the Mosaic Project, and are there special challenges in being a woman in jazz, as well as special rewards of working with other women?
Well, this project that Terry did, I think, is a real breakthrough kind of project, and it empowers this base of women musicians. I met Esperanza through Terry, and we developed a trio that is one of my favorite things to do. I really enjoy it. Terry continues to tour with the Mosaic Project with different women musicians, so there's always this very interesting, and it's not women, all women. She has collaborations with men in the Mosaic Project too. But certainly it's an empowering kind of experience to see this be such a success for her and for the women that are involved, and young women that I think it benefits them to see that this is a possibility for them.
Are there still challenges for women, more challenges for women than men in jazz, do you think? Or?
Well, I think in terms of women in general, not just jazz, there are challenges in terms of, the kinds of barriers that are there. Jazz is no different than the rest of the world, so to speak. So, but I have to say that I've been particularly fortunate, as I mentioned, throughout my career. People like Marcus Belgrave was there. And I remember, the musicians talking about Alice Coltrane when she was a young musician. She's from Detroit as well. They talked about her. I got to see Terry Pollard as a teenager, a great piano player, to play with Terry Gibbs. And so seeing these women, for me, created an opportunity for me to see myself in that place. And so I think that's why Mosaic is so great too, because it creates this possibility for younger women musicians.
And when you bump up against those barriers, how have you been able to negotiate them? Get around them?
I don't know how to respond to that. I think we just, go to another door. Doors closed, you go to another door. A lot of times it's a better possibility. So I think for all of us, we have those experiences of, being rejected, not necessarily getting the job we wanted, not getting the promotion. Those things happen in everyday life to all of us. So we adjust, that's a part of improvising. We improvise through our lives. We figure out a better way to get to what our goals are.
All right, so you mentioned before that you were the first jazz graduate at Howard, and not long after that you started teaching at the University of Pittsburgh, and you've taught at a number of schools over the years. Howard, you were a teacher at Howard too, right? And Montclair State and
New England Conservatory.
Right. Mm-hmm. New England Conservatory, and now you're back at Pittsburgh for a couple years now as the head of the program, and talk about how you see jazz education here in 2016. What do you have to give the young musicians to help prepare them for the world as it exists now?
Well, Pitt is my alma mater. I went there for my master's and got my master's in ethnomusicology there under Dr. Nathan Davis, who was my mentor as well. And, through his encouragement, I came back to Pitt as director when he was retiring. And he had built a very impressive program. I mean, he has an academic journal for jazz. He created this Pitt Jazz Seminar for 45 years annually. I think this festival is, how old is this festival? I had heard it was something in that range, so that's a long time. 47 years, 45, 46 years to have successfully, that's longevity. That's what I'm talking about. That's really great. So he created a wonderful program that brings jazz musicians in to deal with the students once a year in a festival kind of setting. We have an archive, and one of my colleagues here, we just acquired the Errol Garner archive, which is a big part of our being here for the festival today. And the Errol Garner archive came to Pitt last year. And we have a wonderful amount of memorabilia from Garner, papers, music, recordings. And so Nathan created this opportunity for us to do that kind of work where we can acquire these precious parts of our legacy, of our culture, a great Errol Garner or Mary Lou Williams, whose piano we just acquired as well. So we're starting to continue to reach out into the Pittsburgh community because that's where we are, and it empowers the community. As you can see here, the way that the legacy is celebrated here is fantastic. So that's what we're trying to do as well at Pitt.
So when you're trying to prepare these young students for a career in jazz, and hopefully the kind of longevity we've been talking about, beyond teaching them how to play their instrument and work in a group, what else do you have to give them today?
Well, our program is the first PhD program in jazz in the country. And our students are scholars, so they're writing about the music, and they're archivists, and they're the ones who are kind of mining the culture, so to speak. So, plus they're good players. So what Dr. Davis, when he set up this PhD program, the idea was to have musicians who were scholars. And so that gives us the opportunity to develop the next, say someone like George Lewis, for instance, great trombonist, scholar, composer, and he's, created this book now that stands as a new paradigm for the expectation for jazz research. And so that's the kind of thing that we are hoping to continue as well.
So part of the message is that there are other careers in jazz besides, going on tour with Art Blakey or whoever.
That's correct.
Yeah.
There's a rich, array of possibilities around supporting the music. And playing is one of those, but there are many others. Scholarship is another one of those directions.
And then also teaching.
And teaching, right. So Jocelyn here, she's sitting up front. She's from the Errol Garner Project, and she is an archivist, and so she's also a vocalist. So we have this, these two different balancing acts. I'm not the scholar in that sense. I mean, I like to support the scholars, because we need them to lay it out in terms of this music is valuable. It needs to be researched and talked about on a very high level. So that's changing the way that music is written about, having people of this level of expertise, and our students are on that path as well.
And if I understand correctly, you're curating some of these reissues of Errol Garner's recorded material for Columbia, is that right?
Well, that's right. That's our next future project that we're doing, yes. And then, of course, Concert by the Sea is directly a result of this Susan Rosenberg having been generous enough to share this music from her aunt, Martha Glazier, who was Earl Garner's partner and manager. So this music is creating an opportunity for us to play and celebrate him and have a lot of fun on stage. Because, if you ever saw Earl Garner, it was all about fun, right? It was all about the joy of life through music. And so we're having the chance to live and stand a little bit in his shoes and enjoy, celebrating the memory of his brilliance.
So explain a little bit about the show you're putting on at the fairgrounds this afternoon.
Okay, so Concert by the Sea, which was recorded in Carmel some almost 61 years ago now, 60 years ago in September, was one of the biggest selling jazz records of all time. I know Kind of Blue is at the top, right? But Concert by the Sea is right there, And, it was great performance by Garner. I don't think he knew that he was being recorded. It was just one of those free experiences. You hear the music and you hear the free it was and how he was playing at a level of just the most brilliant virtuosity, and the trio was well oiled. We talk about that the whole thing of a band really sounding good from years and years and years of practice together. So we're going to play music from that record today. And I'm really excited to have Russell Malone and Derek Oles and this great drummer, Victor Lewis, and then this young, brilliant pianist who is a prodigy of Dr. Billy Taylor's, Christian Sands, who I think is one of the wonderful pianists out here today to play for you, to celebrate this Earl Garner's music.
So each of you will take turns at the piano.
Well, we're going to play. We have two pianos, so
okay.
we can both be up there.
All right. We have time for just a couple questions if anybody has any. Yeah, why don't you step up to the mic here?
My name is Unrehearsed.
Hello.
I'm 82, so I know a lot about what happened in jazz and Earl Garner. Now, in one of those record sessions when Earl played, they let him play, but the A&R man tricked him. So I don't know if you got any money from that, and I'd like to talk to you about that. There's no such thing as man jazz and woman jazz. It's all about jazz and the standard that you meet. Ella, Sarah, and all of them were closely connected with Grant. Duke Ellington, Basie, they all protected. But there was an exception. Mary Lou Williams. She was a boss, and I worked and lived with her for 2 years. And she had such big ears.
You said you worked and lived with her? So could you say that again about Mary Lou?
I was around in the same building, and I was on drugs, and Mary Lou picked me up because he was trying to get her. He said she's off of drugs.
Wow.
Now, what happened when they had a problem with changes, Monk, Miles, all of them would come to Mary, and she would straighten them out. Okay, the best place in the world is New York City. I worked at the Apollo. Stevie Wonder came in, and his bass player was Lee Gene Keys.
I know
who I knew.
Gene Keys.
He gave me the gifts, so they brought me to Motown. I worked with Stevie, Gladys and I.
Oh, you did?
So the best place is you have to know people, and you have to get in a clique. Yeah. Because I'm a bass player. Milt Hinton,
Oh, yeah.
Paul Chambers, Buster Williams,
Yeah.
all of them knew I'm retired. But if I can about.
We'd love to talk to you. We'd love to talk to you and pick your brain. Thank you.
All right, I think we
Dr.
have time
Taylor
for-
talked about, I'm sorry, Dr. Taylor, Billy Taylor, and John Malachi. They both talked about those salons at Mary Lou's house where Bud Powell and Thelonious Monk was there. And John Malachi showed me the way that Monk taught him how to play Ruby My Dear. And that whole experience, it's a legend. All those musicians that would be there. And were you there as well, Hamilton Terrace?
That's where I lived. Mary Lou lived down the block. But Mary Lou took care of Bud Powell's.
Bud Powell?
Bud Powell.
Yeah?
She would take care of Bud because Bud was on drugs. When they fancy Mary Lou was converted into
Yes,
Catholicism.
that's right.
Not by O'Brien, but another Jesuit priest. I know that story. So there's an exchange when Mary came back between a drummer, I forgot his name. She would get him his chick to come back to New Orleans. His name was Bullshit. Well, I know all of the inside.
We have to get all the history. That's a lot of history you have there. Thank you so much, sir.
All right, so we're running out of time, unfortunately. There's a lot more to talk about, but thanks a lot for Geri Allen for sharing her thoughts with us. And please come back tomorrow for the next session of Sync Up. All right, thanks.